Hello, an artificial intelligence-supported avatar designed by İzmir Academy Association for this conference. I will make the presentation of our conference with the possibilities of technology. So let's start.
Merhaba, ben İzmir Akademi Derneği'nin bu konferans için tasarladığı yapay zeka destekli bir avatarım. Teknolojinin imkanları ile sizlere konferansımızın sunumunu gerçekleştireceğim. Haydi başlayalım.
Dear participants, welcome to İzmir International Conference on Technology and Social Sciences. First of all, we will start with the Turkish national anthem. Now, I kindly invite you to listen and accompany our national anthem.
Değerli katılımcılar, hepiniz İzmir Uluslararası Teknoloji ve Sosyal Bilimler Konferansı'na hoş geldiniz. Konferansımıza İstiklal Marşımız ile başlayacağız. Sizleri dinlemeye ve İstiklal Marşımıza eşlik etmeye davet ediyoruz.
Thank you. Now we would like to present you a short promotional video of our conference.
Teşekkür ederiz. Şimdi konferansımızın kısa bir tanıtım videosunu sizlere sunmak istiyoruz. İyi seyirler dileriz.
İzmir International Conference on Technology and Social Sciences is formed in 2021 to propose an interdisciplinary approach to help understand problems in social sciences by using new technologies. The aim of the conference is to analyze the problems and to provide an ideal academic platform for researchers to present the latest developments, research findings, ideas, and applications of social sciences and technology. The purpose of this conference is to come together with scientific study scholars working in different disciplines, to exchange knowledge and experiences and thus prepare the ground for multidisciplinary studies. This is the first conference organized by İzmir Academy Association with the support of International Vision University from North Macedonia and the University of Tiran from Albania. There will be 5 respected invited speakers from all over the world. The first invited speaker is Associate Professor Aybeyan Selim from International Vision University, Republic of North Macedonia. The second invited speaker is Associate Professor Enriquina from the University of Tiran, Albania. The third invited speaker is Associate Professor Biljana from the Megatrend University of Belgrade, Serbia. The fourth invited speaker is Dr. Jelina HAINES from the University of South Australia. The last invited speaker is Assistant Professor Sachi ARAFAT from King Abdulaziz University Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. We wish you a good and useful conference. Thank you for watching the promotional video. Our program will continue with the presentations of the conference chairs. First of all, Technology Area Chair of the conference, Assistant Professor Ömer AYDIN will make the opening speeches in English. Then, Social Sciences Area Chair of the conference, Associate Professor Selim ŞANLISOY will make the opening speeches in Turkish. Now I leave the spec to Assistant Professor Ömer AYDIN.
Tanıtım videosunu izlediğiniz için teşekkür ederiz. Programımız konferans başkanlarının sunumları ile devam edecektir. Öncelikle Teknoloji Alan Başkanı Doktor Öğretim Üyesi Ömer AYDIN açılış konuşmalarını İngilizce olarak yapacaktır. Ardından Sosyal Bilimler Alan Başkanı Doçent Doktor Selim ŞANLISOY açılış konuşmalarını Türkçe olarak yapacaktır. Şimdi sözü Doktor Öğretim Üyesi Ömer AYDIN'a bırakıyorum.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to first conference named İzmir International Conference on Technology and Social Science. This is Dr. Ömer AYDIN from Turkey, Manisa Celal Bayar University. I am the co-chair of the conference. We share the conference chairship with Associate Professor Dr. Selim ŞANLISOY from Turkey, Dokuz Eylul University. He will also make a welcome speech after me. I am the technology chair of the conference. He is the social science chair of the conference. Today is a very important day for us because we have reached this day by going through a long, difficult, exhausting, but equally enjoyable and beneficial process. First of all, I want to give some information about our association. Academicians from different universities in Turkey 2021 decided to establish a non-governmental and non-profit organization in İzmir called İzmir Academia Association. This organization aims to publish academic journals and books, make academic events, provide education to improve society, and do projects. It publishes books and journals free of charge, and these are fully open access. As of now, we have 4 academic journals. These are Journal of Metaverse, Journal of Emerging Computer Technologies, İzmir Journal of Social Science, and Ege Journal of Educational Technologies. A total of 7 books have been published in the fields of technical and social science in about a year since its establishment. İzmir International Conference on Technology and Social Science is our first academic event. In line with our main objectives, we decided to organize this conference by the authorized bodies of our association and started to make announcements to hold the conference in 2022. After we announced this decision, some universities supported us. First of all, we signed a cooperation protocol with International Vision University, one of the most respected and leading universities in Republic of North Macedonia. Then we signed a cooperation protocol with the University of Tehran, one of the best universities in Albania. We would like to thank both universities for their support in the organization of this event. İzmir International Conference on Technology and Social Science is a federated organization dedicated to bringing together a significant number of diverse scholarly studies for presentation within the conference program. With its high quality, it provides an exceptional value for students, academics, and industry researchers. The conference aims to bring together leading academic scientists, researchers, and research scholars to exchange and share their experiences and research results on the aspects of social science focusing on technology. It also provides a premier interdisciplinary platform for researchers, academicians, and educators to present and discuss the most recent innovations, trends, and concerns, as well as practical challenges encountered and solutions adopted in the fields of social science. Papers in Turkish, English, and French were accepted for review. More than 50 papers were submitted and received for our conference. The authors are from more than 10 different countries in Europe, Asia, America, Australia, and Africa continents. Moreover, we have 5 invited speakers from 5 different countries. They will make their speech after the chair's speech. The first invited speaker is Associate Professor Aybeyan Selim from International Vision University, Republic of Macedonia. The second invited speaker is Associate Professor Jelina from the University of Tehran, Albania. The third invited speaker is Associate Professor Biljana İLIC from Megatrend University of Belgrade, Serbia. The fourth invited speaker is Dr. Jelina HAINES from the University of South Australia. The last invited speaker is Assistant Professor Sachi ARAFAT from King Abdulaziz University, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. I want to thank all of them for their support and contribution to our conference. Also, I want to thank to all participants and listeners. So now I want to announce the co-chair of the conference, Associate Professor Selim ŞANLISOY. He will make his opening speech in Turkish. I wish a good and successful conference to all participants.
İzmir Akademi Derneği öncülüğünde Uluslararası Vizyon ve Tren Üniversitelerinin işbirliğiyle düzenlenen İzmir Uluslararası Teknoloji ve Sosyal Bilimler Konferansı'na hoş geldiniz, onur verdiniz. Dergi ve kitap yayıncılığının yanı sıra geliştirdiği diğer bilimsel projelerle de bilim dünyasına katkı sunmayı amaçlayan İzmir Akademi Derneği, ilkini sizlerin de katılımıyla gerçekleştirdiği bu konferansı gelenekselleştirmeyi hedeflemektedir. Böylece farklı alanlardan bilim insanlarının ele aldıkları konuları tartışabilecekleri, değerlendirebilecekleri bilimsel bir ortam yaratılmış ve bu ortama sürdürülebilirlik kazandırılmış olacaktır. 21. yüzyılda dünya çapında köklü dönüşümlerin yaşandığı ve yaşanmaya devam edeceği bir döneme şahitlik ediyoruz. Bilgi toplumuna doğru yaşanan bu dönüşümde en etkili olan faktör kuşkusuz ki teknolojik değişim ve yeniliklerdir. Artık uluslararası rekabeti ve gücü belirleyen unsur yenilikçilik ya da bilgi ve yenilik üretimi olarak karşımıza çıkmaktadır. Günümüzde küresel rekabetin bilgi temelli olarak hız kazanması ve bilgi ekonomisinin toplumsal gelişmenin anahtarı haline gelmesi, ülkelerin toplumsal yapısının bilgi toplumu dönüşümünü gerektirmektedir. Dönüşümün ne kadar başarılı bir şekilde gerçekleştirildiği veya dönüşüm sürecinde ne kadar ilerlendiği, özellikle gelişmekte olan ülkeler açısından kritik bir önem taşımaktadır. Söz konusu dönüşüm süreci, özellikle uzun vadeli politikalar vasıtasıyla yapısal değişimleri gerektirmektedir. Bu konuda eğitim politikaları büyük bir önem arz etmektedir. Bir ülkede uygulanacak eğitim politikasına ilişkin değişikliklere değinildiğinde, çoğunlukla fen bilimleri, mühendislik, tıp ve matematik gibi doğa bilimlerine ilişkin reform politikaları düşünülmektedir. Tüm bu alanlarda ilerlemenin yaşanmasının zorunluluğu önemli bir gerçektir. Bununla birlikte sosyal bilimlerinde doğa bilimleri kadar hatta onlardan daha önemli olduğu gözden kaçırılmamalıdır. Sosyal bilimlere gerektiği kadar önem verilmemesi, bu alandaki değerlerin toplum tarafından yeterince benimsenememesini beraberinde getirmektedir. Dolayısıyla özellikle gelişmekte olan ülkelerde yeterince demokratik bir hukuk düzeni oluşturulamamakta, demokrasi kültürü, hoşgörü kültürü ve uzlaşma kültürü toplumda yer bulamamaktadır. Tüm bunların yerine toplumda çatışma, ötekini reddetme ve hatta bertaraf etme eğilimleri ortaya çıkmaktadır. Ayrıca sosyal, politik ve kültürel alanlarda yaşanan yapısal problemlerin çözümlenmesi neredeyse imkansız hale gelmektedir. Eğitim sistemiyle ilgili bir başka sorun ise bireylerin erişmiş oldukları bilgi ve beceri düzeyine ilişkin olarak yaşanmaktadır. Özellikle baskıcı, ezberci ve sorgulamayan eğitim sistemleri pasif, analitik düşünce yeteneğine sahip olmayan, sorgulamayan bireylerin yetişmesini beraberinde getirmektedir. Böylesi bir durumda uygulanması gereken politika, bilimsel düşünce yeteneğini geliştirici, sorgulayan, analitik düşünce yeteneğine sahip, yenilikçi, insan haklarına saygılı, demokrat, hoşgörülü ve uzlaşmaya değer veren kişilerin yetişmesini mümkün kılacak bir eğitim sisteminin meydana getirilmesidir. Bilgi toplumunun ve ekonomisinin en önemli unsuru bilgi ve yeniliktir. Bilgi ve yenilik yaratabilme gücünü belirleyen en önemli faktör de insanların hayal gücüdür. Eğitim sisteminde az önce bahsetmiş olduğum yaşanan sorunlar aynı zamanda bireylerin hayal gücünü ve dolayısıyla yenilik yaratma potansiyelini yok etmektedir. Böylece örneğin yazılım mühendisleriniz olsa bile bunlar yeterince yenilik yaratamayabileceklerdir. Sonuç olarak konferansımızın isminin teknoloji ve sosyal bilimleri birleştirerek İzmir Uluslararası Teknoloji ve Sosyal Bilimler Konferansı şeklinde belirlenmiş olması bilinçli bir tercihin ürünü olup farklı alanlardan bilim insanlarının bir araya getirilmesi amaçlanmıştır. Sözlerime son verirken tüm katılımcılarımız için başarılı bir konferans olarak geçmesini diliyorum. Hoşça kalın.
We would like to thank our esteemed conference chairmen for their opening speeches. In this part of our program, the speeches of our invited speakers will take place. Now, Associate Professor Aybeyan Selim from International Vision University. Associate Professor Enriquina from Tirana University. Associate Professor Biljana İlic from Belgrade Megatrend University. Dr. Jelina HAINES from the University of South Australia and, finally, Assistant Professor Sachi ARAFAT from King Abdulaziz University will deliver his speech. We firstly invite Associate Professor Aybeyan Selim to make the first speech.
Açılış konuşmaları için değerli konferans başkanlarımıza teşekkür ediyoruz. Programımızın bu kısmında davetli konuşmacılarımızın konuşmaları yer alacaktır. Sırası ile Uluslararası Vizyon Üniversitesi'nden Doçent Doktor Aybeyan Selim, Tiran Üniversitesi'nden Doçent Doktor Enriquina, Belgrade Megatrend Üniversitesi'nden Doçent Doktor Biljana İlic, Güney Avustralya Üniversitesi'nden Doktor Jelina HAINES ve son olarak da Kral Abdulaziz Üniversitesi'nden doktor öğretim üyesi Sachi ARAFAT konuşmalarını yapacaktır. İlk konuşmayı yapmak üzere Doçent Doktor Aybeyan Selim'i davet ediyoruz.
Firstly, I want to thank the organizing committee for their kind invitation to be a speaker at this international conference. I am Professor Aybeyan Selim, Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Architecture in International Vision University from North Macedonia. My talk will be about digital competencies in higher education. The development of information and communication technologies is considered one of the greatest revolutions in human communication and information management. Information revolution describes current economic, social, and technological trends. The main feature of the information revolution is the growing economic, social, and technological role of information. Now we live in information age. The information age, also known as computer age, and it is characterized by a rapid epochal shift from a traditional industry to an economy primarily based upon information technology. Today, we are witnessing that information and communication technologies, the internet and other ICT tools have become a significant part of world economy, and microcomputers greatly change many business and industries. The concept of network society is closely related to globalization and the role of the electronic communications in society. The social structure now is based on network and ICT. Facebook, Twitter, instant messages, and email are prime examples of network society at work. These web services allow people worldwide to communicate through digital means without face-to-face contact. We are talking about interconnected world where we can find anything, we can display, exchange, transfer, receive, solve both in real time everywhere in the world. The figure shows the life expectancy of an average citizen before and today. Previously, work life was university, job, and retirement. Early, the workers didn't need to acquire new knowledge and skills. But now we see that it's often talked about lifelong learning. Employees often spend their entire lifetime in one workplace. And after university, before, it is not required for additional training for most workers. But now, employees must constantly improve and acquire new knowledge and skills during education and work life. Work life is getting longer, and even in retirement, citizens are reaching for new knowledge. Today, expected more frequent job changes, namely 15 to 20 jobs during the working life. Since job content often changes, more workers will need additional training. This means that also academic staff will need upskills. For better understanding that upskills, we must discuss about digital competencies. Digital competence is the confident, critical, and creative use of information technologies in the context of work, learning, and social participation. The digital competence framework has 5 areas. First area is information and data literacy. This area used to articulate information needs, to locate and retrieve digital data, information, and content. Communication and collaboration contain the interaction communication between digital technologies. Digital content creation, this area is used to improve and integrate information to create and edit digital content. Safety. Safety means to protect devices, content, personal data. Problem solving is to identify needs and problems and resolve situation in digital environment. The term related with digital competency is the digital literacy. Digital literacy is the ability of using of digital networks and softwares. The digital literate a person must have the 7 digital literacy elements given in this slide. Information literacy means to find, interpret, evaluate, manage, and share information. Media literacy means to critically read, creatively produce academic and professional communications. Communication and collaboration means to participate in digital networks. Career in identity management means to manage digital reputation and online identity. Learning skills, study about learning effectively in technology-rich environments. ICT literacy means to adopt and use digital devices and application and services. Digital scholarship means to participate in professional and research practices that depend on digital systems. In this slide are given 8 essential elements of the digital literacy. I want to comment on this slide because I don't want to exceed the time of the presentation. To be university teacher in the digital age means to be active participant in Science 2.0. Science 2.0 is suggested new approach to science that uses information sharing and collaborative network technologies. Web 2.0 technologies inspired from collaborative works. Science 2.0 increase collaboration between scientists. Use collaborative tools like wikis, blogs, and video journals to share findings and raw data online. As a scientist, we are expected to use this networking power of the internet to solve problems. Today, thousands of scientific software programs are freely available online for collaborative works. Public Library of Science, Archive, Galaxy Zoo, OpenWebWare, are some of web offering opportunities for scientific collaborations today. In order to better understand digital competence in North Macedonia, we need to look at internet access data. According to the data from the State Statistical Institute of North Macedonia, statewide internet access in 2021 was 83.7%. It has been determined that this increase in internet access is due to the increasing use of mobile devices and their access to the internet. The internet is mostly used for making phone calls, 90.6%. For social media, 85.2%. Using instant messages like Skype, Messenger, WhatsApp, Viber, 82.3%. Reading online, 71.7%, and getting information about health problems, 57.9%. At the International Vision University, we tested the digital competence skills of academic staff, students, and administrative personnel with our university information system. Our university information system is based on a client-server web solution, where the user doesn't need to install a local mobile application. This application feature allows the proposed solution to be independent for a wide range of ICT devices and operating systems. Our university information system was developed as a web application using various tools and technologies such as HTML5, CSS3, jQuery, C#, Ajax, and Bootstrap. Our information system application can be executed with any standard web browser and serve as a communication interface between the user and the server via web services. Our application interface we designed to be simple, attractive, and customized for any user with quick access to all informations. In the most intensive period of digitalization with our university information system, we respond the university needs and give a new meaning to the data being processed. The university information system provides many data from parameters such as course records, group access, students records, staff records. Also, thanks to the web-based approach of our system provides easy access to students attending course toward distance education and online learning. University information system, such a software solution, helped us a lot in the realization of the curriculum during COVID-19 pandemic. Based on the data from the university system, we notice that there is not a big difference in students' success between pre-COVID and post-COVID education periods. Obtained results from our application show that applying online education during pandemic makes sense. We notice that participating in online classes increase success. From all facts of this presentation, we can say that digital literacy represents an additional attribute of the importance for professors and students as a member of higher education and network society with well-developed digital competencies today. This is my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Now, because I am native Turkish speaker, I want to speak something in Turkish. Thank you again. Sayın Ömer Hocam, İzmir Uluslararası Teknoloji ve Sosyal Bilimler Konferansı'na nazik davetiniz için tekrardan teşekkür etmek istiyorum. İnşallah bu türden uluslararası konferansın ikincisini, üçüncüsünü, 10'uncusunu, 100'üncüsünü organize etme fırsatınız olacaktır. Şimdiden ikincisini Uluslararası Vizyon Üniversitesi'nde örgütlememiz için sizleri davet ediyorum. Herkesin bildiği gibi Kuzey Makedonya Mustafa Kemal Atatürk'ün babasının doğup büyümüş olduğu bir ülkedir. Türkçemizin ve Türk kültürünün hala canlı olduğu bir ülkedir. Kuzey Makedonya'da 120 bin civarında Türk hala yaşamaktadır. Ülkemizin bütün bu güzelliklerini görmeleri için aynı zamanda bu uluslararası konferansa katılım sağlayan diğer katılımcıları da şimdiden davet etmek istiyorum. Aynı zamanda bu uluslararası konferansa katılım sağlayacak tüm hocaları selamlıyorum ve şimdiden kendilerine başarılar diliyorum. İkinci konferansta görüşmek üzere. Hepinizi saygı ve selamla selamlıyorum. Görüşmek üzere.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear professors, I would like to greet you all from Serbia. My name is Biljana İlic and I'm an associate professor at the Megatrend University of Belgrade, Video of Business and Management. I wrote a paper titled Serbian Tourism Management and Planning Using New Business Technologies in collaboration with my colleague Gordana Đukić, a researcher at the Faculty of Economics at Belgrade. First of all, I want to thank to the organizer and Mr. AYDIN for this opportunity as well as for the invitation to participate in the İzmir conference. Now, I would like you to tell you more about the subject of my paper. Based on the global, turbulent environment, tourism should continuously collect new creative ideas in order to meet the needs of different consumers of tourism products. The paper presents the use of new technologies, but also the comparison of Serbia with some developed countries in Europe, like Switzerland and Norway, in terms of the use of information technology. Nowadays, we are all witnessing on a global level the great roles that new technologies play in all spheres of human society. New technologies and their application in tourism are becoming the driving force of modern tourism industry. For the development of tourism in Serbia, it is necessary to mention the drafting of the new tourism development strategy for the period from 2016 to 2025, which contains numerous analyses of the current state and current level of tourism development in Serbia. The objectives of the strategy include sustainable economic, environmental and social development of tourism, strengthening the competitiveness of the tourism industry and related activities in the domestic and international markets, increasing direct and total participation of the tourism sector in gross domestic product, EA and GDP, and in the structure of the total number of employees. How much and where is Serbia when the growth and development of tourism are in focus remains to be assessed by looking at certain situations. The guidelines based on the analysis of Serbian tourism could indicate the possibility in many ways of Serbia's progress towards sustainable tourism business. It is necessary to say that at the global level in the tourism sector, new trends in business are evident and more pronounced. In the field of promotion and reservations, new communication and promotional tools have been developed. They are based on e-marketing technology for communication with consumers, greatly increasing the efficiency of marketing activities. Sharing economy and virtual across-sector platform for providing information, communication between consumers according to the peer-to-peer model are becoming a feature of the new situation in the tourism business. Also, in accordance with the recommendations of the World Tourism Organization, it is necessary that e-marketing technology for communication with consumers be accessible to people with disabilities. Today's online distribution network, mobile smartphones, tablets, and other portable mobile devices have a crucial impact on travel decisions. Consumers have access to a lot of information when there is no mechanism of influence, but it is very important to constantly be present on the social media and monitoring the reaction of consumers. The revolution in the placement of promotional messages is brought about by 3D technology by stimulating experience in emotions. The ICT technology and social media provide special opportunities for developing countries to keep pace with modern trends and operate more efficiently in the market without the use of large financial resources. E-tourism has grown into a new paradigm called smart tourism. Because smart tourism is based on the use of Industry 4.0 technologies, which contains of Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, sensor use, cognitive technologies, and similar stuff, it is often called Tourism 4.0. Technological innovation within Industry 4.0, although of great importance to sectoral applications in tourism and hospitality, due to their complexity are often not recognized by businessmen and companies in tourism and hospitality in many countries. I would like to tell you some more about the Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Index. The Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Index, TTCI, is an indicator of the level of the national economy that contains factors that are important for the sustainable development of tourism because they contribute to the competitiveness of each country. TTCI consists of 4 sub-indices. First, enabling environment with 5 pillars. Second, TNT policy and enabling conditions with 4 pillars. Third, infrastructure with 3 pillars. And fourth, natural and cultural resources with 2 pillars, plus 90 individual indicators which are within different pillars. ICT readiness is the 5th pillar of the enabling environment sub-index. The ICT index is an indicator of the existing capacity of companies and individuals to provide tourist online services. The higher level of ICT readiness shows that there is a greater willingness to use the internet in tourism companies. When ICT readiness is higher, then the digital infrastructure logically is more developed and the quality of digital tourism services in companies is higher. The comparative components of the TTCI of Switzerland, Norway, and Serbia are shown in the table, but I would like to discuss it. Switzerland achieved a high rank of TTCI, 10 with score 5.0, and has high competitiveness and ranks best in relation to Serbia and Norway. Ranks compared with Serbia and Norway, although it had a decline in the overall results in the period from 2070 to 2090 by 4 places. It had high performance in terms of environmental sustainability, the first, human resources and labor market, the second, and business environment, third. It uses a high level of ICT in the business environment, in innovations, and interactions with tourists. However, digital technologies are less represented when the point is on the communicating with citizens. Switzerland should be paid special attention to price competitiveness, where it has a very unfavorable result, then on natural resources and on cultural resources and business travel. Norway is one of the most competitive European TNT economies with a TTCI rank of 20 and score 6.3, although it had a decline too in the overall result in the period from 2070 to 2090 for 2 places from 80 to 20. It achieved good results in terms of infrastructure and ICT readiness and also in air transport. Norway lags behind Switzerland by 3 places in terms of the use of ICT technology in tourism. However, Norway should improve the performance of natural resources, digital tourism, and the business environment. Where is Serbia? Serbia achieved the biggest improvement in TTCI in Europe because it advanced by 12 places in the period from 2070 to 2090 and reached 83rd place in the world, although Serbia lags behind Switzerland, which is on the 10th place, and behind Norway, which is on 20th place, out of 140 observed countries. Serbia's policy was focused on the development of the tourism industry TNT and provided more favorable conditions in terms of visas, airfare, and airport taxes, and thus the openness of the country and reduced costs which affected the arrival of tourists. Despite the improvement in the performance of the business environment and the human resource market, Serbia should become more competitive. This is possible if it develops its cultural and national resources and increases the attractiveness of its national country brand. Also, it is necessary to increase the level of ICT readiness for Serbia. In terms of ICT, Serbia lags behind Switzerland by 51 and behind Norway by 48 places. So, the conclusion. Based on the context of current economic developments in the global market, geostrategic position, and open process of Serbia's accession to the European Union, current situation and development potential of tourism and hospitality and related activities, it is necessary for the government of Serbia to establish a new medium and long-term tourism mission, commitments such as measures for the development of energy, industry, agriculture, and especially the introduction of new information technologies. This is extremely important for overall domestic economic growth if we keep in mind that tourism and hospitality in the current global financial and economic crisis have shown the highest rate of recovery and global growth. So thank you for your attention. I wish you a good day and a good work on this conference.
Hello everyone from South Australia to Izmir. I'm really grateful and honored to be invited as an invited guest speaker. Thank you. I am Jelina HAINES, a Filipino-born Australian with ancestral link to Indigenous Americas, Mexico. I finished my PhD during the COVID-19, first wave of COVID-19, where South Australia closed public buildings, including my university, which is the University of South Australia, and local travels and interstates and the borders were closed. Social distancing was quite strict, so it was quite a challenge in trying to navigate the digital space during the lockdown because we were not allowed to travel anywhere. So during this time, my thesis, I was on the writing stage. Really, I was really getting worried of how I'm gonna do it because I have no access to the university's technical and digital equipment. So I only have laptop with me and mobile phone. So that's what we have, and internet access at home. During that time wasn't good. You always have the dropouts, but I managed to finish my thesis with the help of the elders I was working with, and the challenge and the things, the results and the outcomes is quite different. We're trying to get the social impact of using digital technologies and equipment during my writing stage, and trying to focus on my research and the interdisciplinary approach to it related to information behavior and ethical information recovery of specific knowledge held by the elders, and trying to do that during the COVID-19, the social distancing, and my travel back and forth with the community, because the community that I work with is 200 km away from my home. So we constantly just using mobile phone during our interview and trying to present that with the written text that I have to the oral traditional people. So it was quite a tricky one of trying to match in between on both sides and trying to get this confirmation to the elders and which one is allowed. So there was advantages and disadvantages of trying to work and navigate on the digital space. So trying to find a word or sentences or trying to explain of how this my research feed into these conferences around the themes of technology and social sciences. So I can straight away I can just relate to my own research, where it was right in the middle of the COVID-19 and the issues, the differences, and trying to understand the digital divide between the non-indigenous and indigenous people. This time we really have to really understand, and especially with Auntie Ellen, trying to pass on her knowledge through online learning with the recording. So that is specific learning process where technology and social sciences has to go hand in hand, especially with involving indigenous people, marginalized communities, where technology is really quite important during the social distancing. The research that I'm about to share to you is focused on what role of community-based perceptual research on digital and social inclusion, data visualization of indigenous knowledge practices. So these projects show about the data visualization within the visual context and trying to navigate large data and making into graphical framework, and also models and images and video in the research itself. So actually, the focus is trying to distinguish the divide and the impact of the COVID-19 during this time. As you can see in the image, That's Auntie Ellen Trevorrow. She's one of my cultural mentors. The image was taken during the lockdown, the first wave of COVID-19, and this one was taken during that time where Auntie Ellen and I was trying to do e-learning workshop, e-weaving workshop via Zoom meeting, Zoom interface. So she was teaching and collaborating with a few elders from New South Wales, Australia. But as you can see, we use few different equipments. That to your left at the far end, that screen was used as Auntie Ellen's program timetable. The one that in front of her is used as her screen so that she can see all the elders, the participants that come from New South Wales, and the one that behind it is my mobile phone as used as a internet host, and the tablet next to her right in front of her is used to record her weaving process in close-up space so that the elders from New South Wales can see it or how her hands movement. So the focus is trying to understand how technology and the social sciences combined, and the COVID-19 brought all those challenges in between, both disadvantages and advantages, both sides, because it brings to the surface how technology was used during this time. So we have the importance of data visualization in an indigenous context. Data visualization provides a better analysis, allowing the identification of trends and patterns to gain greater insights and understanding the structure of the data and turn them into a story, a readable and easy to follow story. As we move to digital communication, we wrestle with information load. We have so much information to record and adapt. So the importance of images and visual media is changing how we represent data. For example, in the image, they had so much information in front of her, and then trying to concise and make it understand easily, it's quite a challenge. So today, the written text itself it's rendered as insufficient to understand, and the content is hard to follow. On the other hand, having graphics alone is also inadequate. So written text and visuals complement each other. The synergy of the text and the graphics can be appreciated by talking or sharing them with others, like the one I'm doing now. I'm talking to you. I'm far away, but I'm talking to you in the front of the screen and trying to explain what data visualization is. So like the indigenous people, they share their stories through storytelling. They pass on and disseminate their cultural stories through communal practices like weaving in a more constructive way in storytelling and traditional practices. The importance of data visualization completes the story from complex data sets to visuals and presents them into a graphical format to trace out any unseen patterns and connect those patterns to data and also written text. So data visualization is important, especially if the oral knowledge that only passed on through storytelling. So written text and visual images complement each other. Related takes on data visualizations shows that 1/3 of the human brain is devoted to visualization, ideas, and visual memory. Data visualization engages human senses, and that senses involves our mannerism, our behavior, the way we work, the way we put our hands around, like what I'm doing now in front of you. I'm waving around my hands. But without the data visualization, especially with recording, we would not be able to see them. So just small mannerisms that we often misplaced if we only focus on the written text. So having the visuals together, it combined as a whole story and easy to understand. and assist also the scientists and non-scientists in better understanding about the complex data and ideas that we present. So visual imagery allows vast amounts of abstracts and data conveyed into a concise and pictorial forms like models and frameworks. McDowell added that creativity can assist individuals in turning their intuition and knowledge into workable ideas, linking digital data visualization to bridge the gap between the vision of traditional speakers and the technical thinking and jargon of information that often represents in scientific research. Haley and Modi emphasized also that data visualizations need to convey a well-integrated framework with clarity, and partly is because the general public is not always familiar with research jargon, and often the scientific research often get lost in the translation. So data visualization assists those communication in between and create a creative layer and agree with information in a manner that highlights the key features of the ideas. So data visualization is quite important in terms of trying to express this data that it's hard to explain and bigger sizes. So it focuses on trying to explain key ideas that it's easy for non-scientist readers, non-scientist users. In this research, I use a methodology under the shared perspective, where it creates that working towards inclusion and complete inclusion from the community, and that shared perspective based on my 20 years working relationship with the same community. At the same time, during this time, it leads to a deeper understanding of community issues and how knowledge seekers like myself relate to the concept and practices of respecting the existing knowledge, and to build that trust without biases. Research sustainability depends on my mentors, their guidance and their wisdom, like Auntie Alice and Auntie Ellen and Uncle Mogi. So they are my cultural mentors throughout my process and during my 20 years of staying in the Narrandera community. So Uncle Mogi said that understanding Narrandera wisdom is to walk alongside to create a mutual knowledge sharing. He said that translating and sharing our knowledge digitally and socially, researchers need to have a clear intention and create ethical approaches that respect and take care of our culture for our children and their future children to the next generation. So you have that mutual relationship rather than a business transaction. Mutual relationship create long-term projects, long-term impact for the community. Here I'll share to you where my research is located. So right at the top of the corner of the map is this Australian map, and where the dot is that's where Camp Corum, that's South Australia section. So the dot where it's where Camp Corum, and my location is about 200 km from my home. So I always stay there a bit longer and extend my stay there every time that I go there for my data gathering. So South Australia have 54 indigenous groups, and the active groups that I'm known is Narrandera, Ghana, Nodjiri, and Wandi communities. So those 4 communities are heavily involved in all aspects of politics, social policy makers, education, technology, health sciences. So they're quite active. So in terms of the Narrandera community, it's an Aboriginal nation of 18 language groups. Narrandera community is built around 18 Lakanyoris, which means tribe, and governing council, it's called the Tindi. It's like similar to the state, like South Australia it's a state. So Narrandera, they have their own Tindi, and they have their own head chief as well, which is called Ropili. At the moment, there's no roughly been chosen since the last elder passed on 6 years ago. Now we focus on trying to understand the role of community-based participatory on this research, and trying to understand the historical roots, where they're coming from, and who developed them, and why it's been developed by them. So it was Kurt Lewin that started it, and then followed to Orlando Bardoras, where he introduced the participatory action research, and then it went to Paulo Freire, Brazilian educator, and then the participatory design introduced in Scandinavia. So I follow Paulo Freire on his concept on that side, because on his idea and belief that change need to be happened by the community. Change need to come from the community, and those changes need to be created by the community. Those voices, the power, bring those power back to the community, instead of us as researchers trying to invade our ideas and introduce it to them. So Paulo's created this space of dialogue. So he focused about dialogue, that shared social interaction in both sides between the researchers and the educators and the community itself. So that's why I like the community-based participatory research approach on this note. And it was quite heavily focused on my PhD research, where the CBPR and the video ethnography was combined together. So video ethnography focuses on video, on how video is being used. But instead of having ethnographic research, it's quite a lengthy process, time-consuming. But video ethnography only focuses on the section of the cultural stories. So that's why it's quite fitting on my research of using CBPR and video ethnography together, because it's links. So you have the CBPR using the principles where you acknowledge the community as an entity and acknowledge the existing knowledge and the strength of the community, whereas you have the video ethnography, just using a section of the cultural stories, so it minimizes your time of working it. So under the CBPR components, you have the core components to your left, and the descriptions to the center. So those core components were developed and extracted from my thesis, and their components are developed from the feedback from the community, and also they're trying to explain what they are, their intentions, and what they're meaning at, so that it's easy for the community to understand, and also it's easy for the researchers if the frameworks being applied to the other communities, the indigenous communities, can be easily understood. So the next framework is trying to focus on conducting research involving indigenous people. So this time I created a framework where it focuses on 7 principles. And it's an iterative process where you have to go back all the time. You have to keep checking from the beginning to the center, at the middle, so that the process is all right and everything get followed. So you have the first principle is to listen first, connect to the community, and acknowledge cultural protocols and the traditional laws. The second principle is trying to establish indigenous ways of knowing. Western knowledge system and indigenous ways of knowing is quite different. So there's a difference to it, and you have to understand it from the beginning. Indigenous ways of thinking about decolonizing the process, understanding the traditional protocols. It's non-linear, it's not straight, whereas you have the Western knowledge, which is linear. So you have to understand both knowledge systems together, So you have the nonlinear and linear knowledge system. So principle number 4 is to utilize community's existing knowledge and the resources that you will be able to use and adapt. So principle 4 is respect and recognize that knowledge areas are key holders, the key keepers of knowledge. And then principle 5 is collaborative engagement. You have to involve the community before you even start and create the intangible results and trying to show the impact and the outcome that will be delivered back to the community. Then principle 6, interpreting data within cultural context, trying to have those research outcome within the cultural context is easy for the indigenous communities to understand. Then finally, principle 7 is plan for extending the process. Instead of just trying to use short terms, but creating long-term projects that will have a greater impact for the community. CBPR have many challenges. These are only a few lists that I have extracted from my thesis. So challenges in CBPR, you just have to be aware with it, like recruiting participants, the geographic, depending how far you have to travel, and providing that genuine commitment to the community in conducting research involving indigenous people. I know and be warned that it's CBPR, it's time-consuming process. The consultation process takes time, and also you have within the CBPR principles, you have to pay attention to community protocols, cultural events, especially funerals. That takes time. With the indigenous community, funerals takes weeks, so you have to be prepared with your research and trying to factor in your timeline that cultural events, you need a space before you're allowed to go back to the community, continue your research. It is expected that priorities and leadership may change, so you have to be adaptable to these changes, and be aware that when the new leaders and new chief and committee chairs go to this community, and the community or group that you're working with will be changed. There'll be changes in leadership. So that's one of the challenges in CBPR. But you just have to be, in CBPR, you have to learn to be resilient. You have to learn to be adaptable, be a listener, be a psychology. So all those things that you have to understand how the CBPR works and make it successful. So under the CBPR, there's a collective standpoint. It is a collective standpoint because you need to have that shared dialogue. And under the CBPR principle, you have the shared perspective as an understanding of what insider and outsider researcher is, the difference of these two, and how the access to the community and limitations. So there is an opportunities and challenges as well, depending which one. I'm lucky enough to be an insider researcher because I can access and I'm allowed to listen and heard some of the stories that outsider researcher have no access to. So being an insider, I have a deep understanding of what the community wants and also wants that they like to have. The challenges is that sometimes when you see things that impede in the process. For example, it takes a long time. And sometimes some of the stories, when you're inside the researcher, you record quite a lot of stories. But some of the stories are secret, and some of the stories is only family. So you only have a section of the stories that you can use for public. You can publish them publicly. So and trying to disseminate those stories is quite different as well. So as you can see in the next slide where Uncle Mugi led the Talkanjiri group, and kids and how those knowledge are passed on through their paintings, the body paints, their stories, and their dancing. So the next slide is talk about the welcoming of the ancestors to the space of the ceremony. The dance is sung in the Narendali language. So enjoy the next slide and see, trying to see and how the differences between the older ones and the younger ones, and how these stories or Uncle Mugi pass on his knowledge to the younger ones. As you heard and listened from the previous slides, now you can see how this knowledge are passed on and how this knowledge are connected to the land, and that ethnographic, video ethnographic process of trying to recording just that segment of the welcome ceremony in language, and seeing the kids working alongside with Uncle Mugi and singing the songs and welcoming the ancestors. So now it says, as Uncle Mugi said, he said, our story is written in the land. He said that the importance and applicability of indigenous wisdom to the contemporary digital world in cultural context is crucial. He added that it's about learning as you're working. You are receiving the wisdom from the elders. You are the artist. You just can't paint without learning, unless you choose different ways how to look alike on the painting. We are good at different things, but we have to share our knowledge for the future generation and leave something for the next generation to come. And this note, Uncle Mugi is trying to say that learning is ongoing. We can't just stop in one corner and say, that's it, I had enough. But in traditional context, the learning is ongoing, is continuing. It doesn't stop until you already know, and you're still learning, because it passes on to the next generations. As you cultural bearer, knowledge holder now, you have to pass on that knowledge to the next person, then the next person. So it's a continuing process. So to conclude my research and my presentation on this note is that researchers working intending to work with the indigenous community must understand that indigenous research requires participatory and decolonizing research process. It is driven by cultural protocols and acknowledging existing knowledge with respect and care. It emphasizes the value of the research and benefits directed back to the community, and acknowledges the shared informed consent, that acknowledging storytellers as co-researchers rather than code or numbers. Instill that balance of power, influencing suitability of digital models that is suitable for the community and is suitable for their skills and knowledge. Combining the indigenous ways of thinking and Western system influencing social research involving indigenous people. And the value of technology, of working together, a shared research, collaboration, and needs the interdisciplinary ways of thinking, especially in the social sciences. So now, the question is that what can IAs and LIS researchers learn from CBPR approach to digital social inclusion involving indigenous people? So this is the one that we have to think in the future research. How can we combine and maximize the digital technologies in the social sciences, and how social sciences be able to maximize that use of technology to have that shared conversation, shared social interaction, particularly in researching in marginalized community. Furthermore, Uncle Mogi said, surviving into a world takes time. In particular, surviving in digital world and trying to navigate yourself in the digital space, you need a strong knowledge, a strong cultural structure, knowing who you are, where you belong, and your identity, and the culture, the tradition. Learn to respect. Importantly, he said, learn to respect yourself. Without your culture, you haven't got much. So trying to navigate ourselves in the digital space under the social sciences, that takes time. So trying to understand this too, and also trying to understand the indigenous ways of thinking and the Western system, where it focuses on nonlinear, indigenous knowledge is nonlinear, and the Western system is linear knowledge. So trying to combine those two, we need a time to sit down and listen each other. So in final thoughts, capitalizing on the use of digital technologies in understanding the social interconnectedness of indigenous knowledge can influence innovations, trends, and interdisciplinary research involving indigenous people. By doing so, it provides appropriate solutions to address indigenous issues from the grassroots levels and trying to face these challenges together that is relevant to the knowledge to indigenous people, and trying to create the social inclusion instead of exclusion. So to that, in my view, in my point, that we have a role as researchers. We have a symbiotic connection with the land. Cultural stories, resilience, and experiences are interwoven with the landscape. We have a vast space of learning and how to understand, to share, and preserving these memories. Memoirs of our cultural identity of who we are. The land records it. The land records where we step and where we travel. So trying to understand this interconnectedness, the digital space, the technology, the space where we're in now, it's like a knowledge system. It's a knowledge system that we work alongside with other people. Here's some of the references I use for this presentation, and some of the references are embedded on the slides. And finally, I'm humbled and grateful for giving me time, listening my presentations, and hopefully I'm able to share something to you. Thank you, and good night from South Australia.
Hi there, I'm Sachi ARAFAT. I'm an assistant professor of data science at King Abdulaziz University in Saudi Arabia, and I want to talk to you about what philosophy is and why it is relevant for the technological sciences. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of this conference for giving me the opportunity to talk about this topic that has been of interest to me for many years, and I hope it will be relevant for many of the attendees and others that will get a chance to look at this at some point in the future. The way I'm going to proceed is that I'm going to introduce some of the terms that pertain to these questions, question of what philosophy is and why it's relevant. And then I'm going to talk about the specific case of information science and retrieval, which is a particular type of technological science. And after that, I'm going to go into some of the examples of where within information science and retrieval philosophical questions appear. So to give an idea of why these are actually so I'm going to give you examples of within information science and retrieval where philosophical questions are relevant. So we'll start with what philosophy actually is, which itself is a philosophical question. But it is an important one to have some understanding of as you begin here, as to what is meant by that term. Now, there are various conceptions of philosophy in the different world traditions. The definition that I've given here captures a common understanding across many of the major traditions of philosophy, from antiquity or before till now, until perhaps the 16th century, after which, in Europe at least, there have been very different conceptions of what philosophy is since the 16th century until now. We're not going to consider many of the differing such traditions, which have quite different definitions in this talk. That would be another discussion. So I'm going to focus on just this notion here, and I'm going to use this for the rest of the talk. Right? So what is philosophy? It is a science which studies the roots of reality. Reality is whatever really is the case. And it does this through discourse, a particular type of discourse. Roots here, by roots, I mean foundational principles that originate and constitute that reality that is understudied. Okay. And these are these foundational principles. Connected to them are foundational questions of which there are answers. Questions that lead to those principles through some sort of philosophical investigative method. Now, science here means something different from what we usually take to be science, which is an empirical science like physics or chemistry or whatever, the natural sciences. Science here means something else. Science here is a type of knowledge that is certain and reasoned, meaning not just uncertain opinions, that understands its conclusions in light of or draws them from their causes and principles, and that organizes its conclusions into a body of truths about a proper object. So this is not necessarily an empirical science, which is about making observations of things in space, but it can also be science whose object is something abstract. It's not visible in space. One example of such a science is mathematics. Science meant in this way. Mathematical objects don't necessarily exist in space, right? In fact, they don't exist in space. Now, these foundational principles that I'm talking about, that are the object of the science of philosophy, are those that form the answers to what are called foundational questions. Questions that lead to those principles through some investigative method, as I put above here. So what's an example of a principle? An example is the following, that the world I see is real. So this laptop in front of me is real. That is a principle. Meaning it's real and not only imagined, it's not only a mental representation. It might also be a mental representation, but it's not only a mental representation. While this might be obvious in some way, I might need to still become certain of it beyond my initial naive belief in it. And the way I do this is through further philosophical investigation and deliberation. Now, what that means is that the doing of philosophy as an act, what kind of act is it? Right? It's a discipline of thinking, whose aim or whose fruits are the discovery of these principles which are actually quite universal, right? So the principles I discover through doing philosophy are not about this thing or that thing, but about the entire class of such things. That's what it means for it to be universal. And it also results in, the doing of philosophy also results in understanding how it is that things in the world, things that are part of reality, which are not principles, resolve to those principles or relate to those principles or break down to those principles. And vice versa, how principles work to compose those things. So how you go from that which is not a principle to the principle, and how you go from the principle back up to that thing which is composed by the principles, right? The way up and the way down are two different kinds of investigation, which are united in philosophical discourse. That's what the philosophical investigative method does. So philosophy here as a science is then not so much about this or that particular object, but all things of a particular class or category, like all cats, plants, atoms, humans, and so on. Not just this or that particular one. If we're talking about particular things instead, this particular cat, this particular table, then the kind of discourse that is attached to that is in fact, in traditional parlance, an art. So art doesn't mean, just painting and so on. In the classical notion of philosophy, classical philosophical notion of art, instead it means to deal with whatever it is that deals with particulars, as opposed to whatever it is that deals with universals, which is what philosophy here means. It is instead whatever it deals with this particular thing or that particular thing. So art is an activity that results in the creation of an artifact, for example, such as a table, or the modification of an artifact, or the modification of a thing that is not an artifact, that is a natural object, such as a doctor who is modifying or changing or instructing the patient to change state from one state to another state, a state of not being healthy to a state of being healthy, for example. Now, when we're talking about arts, the arts also need the sciences, right? In order to do something, in order to make an artifact, in order to change a natural object, you first need knowledge of how to do that. And that kind of knowledge is two-pronged. There's a theoretical aspect and there's a practical know-how aspect of that. Okay. And it is particularly this theoretical aspect, that theoretical aspect of theoretical knowledge that is required to do the art, that links to philosophy. Now, philosophy here, even though I've linked it to theory, or the theoretical aspect, should not be understood as, or understood in the same way as we tend to with that word, right? That word theory, it could mean mathematical theory when we use it these days. It could mean theory in the sense that critical theorists mean it and so on, or social theorists. Here, theory doesn't mean specifically that, right? Here, theory is meant in a much more broader sense, which in the Greek theoria means a sort of ultimate picture of the way things are, okay? So it's a very foundational kind of picture of how things are. It is not, a kind of less foundational construction of things, but it's trying to get at the real picture of things. Okay. So philosophy has to do with the discovery and thinking about of those, the discovery and thinking about those principles that are principles of all things, or things of a particular region of reality that exist, in which case it is, if it is general, if it is about all of reality, that's general philosophy, which there is a name for that in classical philosophy, and that's metaphysics. If it's to do with a particular region of reality, it has a different name, such as the philosophy of human beings, or in traditional terminology, that would be psychology. It could be about the natural world, in which case it would be called natural philosophy, and so on. So that's a very general introduction to, and perhaps an abstract introduction to philosophy. And I want to make just a few more points about this here, because of the nature of this conference. So philosophy is not a social science. Okay, there is a philosophy of social science that studies its foundations, but there can also be a philosophy of mathematics and other things. So it's not a social science. Okay. So yes, different fields have their own philosophical foundations or philosophies, such even the social sciences, of course, such as the philosophy of political science, the political philosophy, philosophy of linguistics, of history, of geography, and so on, and of anthropology, for example. These are pretty old disciplines of philosophy. So just to sort of clarify that, why are we then discussing it here at a conference? Why are we discussing philosophy at a conference bridging between the social and the technological sciences? Well, the answer is that philosophy is amongst their common foundations. So if you want to combine or compare between two sciences, given that a science is not a monolithic structure, it has hierarchy and structure, substructures within it, you can compare and bridge between them by linking each layer to the other corresponding layer in the other science. What are these layers? Well, there's the foundational layer, which are the principles of each science. And usually that's what you want to sort of link up first, right? That's what you need to really link up to understand how these sciences are, should or are related in a fundamental way. You might not start there, you might start at the top, you might look at how, the observational part of that science, which, records observations of that aspect of reality, finds patterns therein. You might want to see how it does it compared to another science. So you might start there, but that will not give you the fundamental relationship between the two sciences. It's only when you look at the principles or the philosophies of those sciences that you understand, how to bridge them or how to relate between them. Now, there's two other terms I want to introduce here because I think it's useful. One is the notion of a xenoscopic science, and one is the notion of the idioscopic science. A xenoscopic science is another name for philosophy. And idioscopic science is another name for a science which deals with observations and not foundations. And that requires special training or tools or equipment to do those observations. Right? Whereas a xenoscopic science, meaning the science of philosophy, does not require any tools. It doesn't require any sort of specialist training. It starts with observation of the world without any tools, just looking around and making sense of things. Okay. So these are two kinds of sciences. Mostly when people talk about science, in the modern parlance, they mean idioscopic science. Empirical sciences are idioscopic sciences. Okay. Using these two terms, we can now further specify what we mean by this idea of relating between the technological and the social sciences, right? What we're looking to do is relate them at the xenoscopic level, right? And not so much at the idioscopic level. Right? That's the goal here. How do you do that? What does that mean even? Is that even relevant? Why look at the cenoscopic part of anything? Well, what we want to show here in the next slide onwards is the example of information science and retrieval, which is a particular technological science. I want to show how pretty quickly, when we look at the recent practical applications of it, we are drawn into the cenoscopic science aspect of those sciences. So even though usually in information science and retrieval, which is the science of search and search engines, usually we deal with documents and queries and all these kinds of things. Because of the modern context in which you make apps to fulfill requests and needs of that context, you are quickly led to questions and problems that are no longer at the idioscopic level. They're no longer about observations and finding patterns in observations, but instead lead quickly to the foundational questions of the cenoscopic aspects of those sciences, right? So that's the whole idea here, to show how that happens. But here we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. There's a few other terms that we still have to explain here, right? And the other term here is technology. Was this technology and the technological sciences? What do we mean by that? So technology is a very broad term. According to classical philosophy, meaning when I say classical philosophy, I mean mainly Aristotle and his followers in the medieval times and even up to the modern time. In that sense, technology refers to artifacts, whatever is not naturally created, whatever is created by man, for example, or machines, right? But more specifically, whatever cannot reproduce itself, right? Now that there's some discussion about whether that really works, because stone can't reproduce itself. It's not, you don't think of a stone that way, but a stone, is not an artifact. Right? It's a natural object. So that definition might not work for that, but I'm going to just stick to it just to make it easier for ourselves here. Now, there are many types of artifacts. There are tables and chairs and cartons and everything else. But amongst those artifacts, we're going to focus on a specific class of artifacts that are relevant for us, and that's the general programmable devices, like phones and computers and wearables and all these kind of things, which are, yes, they're artifacts, but they have a range of functions which may not be in that artifact initially, but can be changed, can be sort of programmed into them over time, as long as they have the hardware capabilities to realize that. So that's what we mean by technology. What about a technological science? A technological science studies particular technologies and particular technological phenomena, right? So you might study certain usage patterns.
Hello, an artificial intelligence supported avatar design.
Hi there, I'm Sachi. I'm an assistant professor. Iictss, meaning this mediation takes in the context of the world, right? Very basic concepts. So we're looking at the bottom layer of this table, definition of query and definition of sense art. So art doesn't mean, just painting and so on in the class. What that means is that the doing of philosophy as an act. What kind of act is it? Right? It's a discipline of thinking, whose aim or whose fruits are the discovery of these principles. Principles which are actually quite universal, right? So the principles I discover through doing philosophy are not about this thing or that thing, but about the entire class of such things. That's what it means for it to be universal. And it also results in, the doing of philosophy also results in understanding how it is that things in the world, things that are part of reality, which are not principles, resolve to those principles or relate to those principles or break down to those principles. And vice versa, how principles work to compose those things. So how you go from that which is not a principle to the principle, and how you go from the principle back up to that thing which is composed by the principles, right? The way up and the way down are two different kinds of investigation, which are united in philosophical discourse. That's what the philosophical investigative method does. So philosophy here as a science is then not so much about this or that particular object, but all things of a particular class or category, like all cats, plants, atoms, humans, and so on. Not just this or that particular one. If we're talking about particular things instead, this particular cat, this particular table, then the kind of discourse that is attached to that is in fact, in traditional parlance, an art. So art doesn't mean, just painting and so on. In the classical notion of philosophy, classical philosophical notion of art, instead it means to deal with whatever it is that deals with particulars, as opposed to whatever it is that deals with universals, which is what philosophy here means. It is instead whatever it deals with this particular thing or that particular thing. So art is an activity that results in the creation of an artifact, for example, such as a table, or the modification of an artifact, or the modification of a thing that is not an artifact, that is a natural object, such as a doctor who is modifying or changing or, instructing the patient to change state from one state to another state, a state of not being healthy to a state of being healthy, for example. Now, when we're talking about arts, the arts also need the sciences, right? In order to do something, in order to make an artifact, in order to change a natural object, you first need knowledge of how to do that. And that kind of knowledge is two-pronged. There's a theoretical aspect and there's a practical know-how aspect of that. Okay. And it is particularly this theoretical aspect, that theoretical aspect of theoretical knowledge that is required to do the art, that links to philosophy. Now, philosophy here, even though I've linked it to theory, or the theoretical aspect, should not be understood as, or understood in the same way as we tend to with that word, right? That word, theory, it could mean mathematical theory when we use it these days. It could mean theory in the sense that critical theorists mean it and so on, or social theorists. Here, theory doesn't mean specifically that, right? Here, theory is meant in a much more broader sense, which in the Greek theoria means a sort of ultimate picture of the way things are, okay? So it's a very foundational kind of picture of how things are. It is not, a kind of less foundational construction of things, but it's trying to get at the real picture of things. Okay. So philosophy has to do with the discovery and thinking about of those, the describing thinking about these principles that are principles of all things, or things of a particular region of reality that exist, in which case it is, if it is general, if it is about all of reality, that's general philosophy, which there is a name for that in classical philosophy, and that's metaphysics. If it's to do with a particular region of reality, it has a different name, such as the philosophy of human beings, or in traditional terminology, that would be psychology. It could be about the natural world, in which case it would be called natural philosophy, and so on. So that's a very general introduction to, and perhaps an abstract introduction to philosophy. And I want to make just a few more points about this here, because of the nature of this conference. So philosophy is not a social science. Okay, there is a philosophy of social science that studies its foundations, but there can also be a philosophy of mathematics and other things. So it's not a social science. Okay. So yes, different fields have their own philosophical foundations or philosophies, such even the social sciences, of course, such as the philosophy of political science, the political philosophy, philosophy of linguistics, of history, of geography, and so on, and of anthropology, for example. These are pretty old disciplines of philosophy. So just to sort of clarify that, why are we then discussing it here at a conference? Why are we discussing philosophy at a conference bridging between the social and the technological sciences? Well, the answer is that philosophy is amongst their common foundations. So if you want to combine or compare between two sciences, given that a science is not a monolithic structure, it has hierarchy and structure, substructures within it, you can compare and bridge between them by linking each layer to the other corresponding layer in the other science. What are these layers? Well, there's the foundational layer, which are the principles of each science. And usually that's what you want to sort of link up first, right? That's what you need to really link up to understand how these sciences are, should or are related in a fundamental way. You might not start there, you might start at the top, you might look at how, the observational part of that science, which, records observations of that aspect of reality, finds patterns therein. You might want to see how it does it compared to another science. So you might start there, but that will not give you the fundamental relationship between the two sciences. It's only when you look at the principles or the philosophies of those sciences that you understand, how to bridge them or how to relate between them. Now, there's two other terms I want to introduce here because I think it's useful. One is the notion of a xenoscopic science, and one is the notion of the idioscopic science. A xenoscopic science is another name for philosophy. And idioscopic science is another name for a science which deals with observations and not foundations. And that requires special training or tools or equipment to do those observations. Right? Whereas a xenoscopic science, meaning the science of philosophy, does not require any tools. It doesn't require any sort of specialist training. It starts with observation of the world without any tools, just looking around and making sense of things. Okay. So these are two kinds of sciences. Mostly when people talk about science, in the modern parlance, they mean idioscopic science. Empirical sciences are idioscopic sciences. Okay. Using these two terms, you can now further specify what we mean by this idea of relating between the technological and the social sciences, right? What we're looking to do is relate them at the xenoscopic level, right? And not so much at the idioscopic level, right? That's the goal here. How do you do that? What does that mean even? Is that even relevant? Why look at the cenoscopic part of anything? Well, what we want to show here in the next slide onwards is the example of information science and retrieval, which is a particular technological science. I want to show how pretty quickly, when we look at the recent practical applications of it, we are drawn into the cenoscopic science aspect of those sciences. So even though usually in information science and retrieval, which is the science of search and search engines, usually we deal with documents and queries and all these kinds of things. Because of the modern context in which you make apps to fulfill requests and needs of that context, you are quickly led to questions and problems that are no longer at the idioscopic level. They're no longer about observations and finding patterns in observations, but instead lead quickly to the foundational questions of the cenoscopic aspects of those sciences, right? So that's the whole idea here, to show how that happens. But here we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. There's a few other terms that we still have to explain here, right? And the other term here is technology. There's technology and the technological sciences. What do we mean by that? So technology is a very broad term. According to classical philosophy, meaning when I say classical philosophy, I mean mainly Aristotle and his followers in the medieval times and even up to the modern time. In that sense, technology refers to artifacts, whatever is not naturally created, whatever is created by man, for example, or machines, right? But more specifically, whatever cannot reproduce itself, right? Now that there's some discussion about whether that really works, because stone can't reproduce itself. It's not, you don't think of a stone that way, but a stone, is not an artifact. Right? It's a natural object. So that definition might not work for that, but I'm going to just stick to it just to make it easier for ourselves here. Now, there are many types of artifacts, there are tables and chairs and cartons and everything else. But amongst those artifacts, we're going to focus on a specific class of artifacts that are relevant for us, and that's the general programmable devices, like phones and computers and wearables and all these kind of things, which are, yes, they're artifacts, but they have a range of functions which may not be in that artifact initially, but can be changed, can be sort of programmed into them over time, as long as they have the hardware capabilities to realize that. So that's what we mean by technology. What about a technological science? A technological science studies particular technologies and particular technological phenomena, right? So you might study certain usage patterns on an iPhone or a watch, iWatch or whatever, certain ways of using apps and so on, that we're all familiar with, right? Now, when we're talking about a technological science, there's two aspects. There's the idioscopic aspect, the observational part, and there's the cenoscopic part. That cenoscopic part of technological sciences is usually dealt with by a discourse within the journals that deal with that science, but also more generally by the philosophy of technology, which studies fundamental principles in relation not only to that particular idioscopic part of that science, but also to philosophy in general, right? So, for example, while a technological science might study particular devices without at all thinking about user psychology as a formal part of that science, a philosophy of technology would have to systematically borrow and make use of principles pertaining to users, meaning human beings. Since with technology having to do with artifacts, there's no way to make sense of these artifacts except as being created, being artifacted, right, by human beings for a particular purpose. And that purpose is to do with human beings again, because it is to benefit them in some way. So the notion of the human being, the notion of the psyche and psychology is not a secondary interesting investigation to do with respect to technology, but it's right there in the foundations of technology. So what do we want to do in the remainder of this talk? So now that we've introduced the terms, we want to show how these sort of cinescopic or philosophical questions show up in the technological sciences. For this, we're not going to survey a whole range of technological sciences. We're going to focus on a particular technological science, which is information science and retrieval. So I'm going to just introduce that briefly here, and in a bit more detail in the next slide. Now, a lot of this is going to be based on the book that we published, that I published with my Prof Ilham Ashuri in 2019, in which we made one of the key theses we made in that book is the following: that these two disciplines, information retrieval and information science, information retrieval looks at the mechanism of search engines. Information science mainly looks at the human element of using search engine and the human element of the creation of the documents that the search engine returns and so on. When you combine these two sciences together, you see them as a sort of juxtaposition. You have this sort of entity, this kind of overall science I call IRNS, just information science and retrieval, that is not just any technological science, but is a kind of paradigmatic one, meaning that the kind of phenomenon it deals with and the way it deals with it is representative of a big range, if not majority, overwhelming majority of other technological sciences. Okay. We go into a little bit more detail on that later on. So what that means is, by analyzing this particular technological science, whatever conclusions you reach can be applied to a whole range of technological sciences. So it becomes a good thing to analyze and a good thing in which to see how philosophical principles work, because whatever we find therein has a wide applicability. Okay. Just to add another insight to that, what is it about information science and retrieval that gives it this sort of paradigmatic or universal aspect? Well, it has to do, firstly, with the phenomenon that it studies. The phenomenon that it studies is search, okay, like Google search. But you might think, okay, Google searches are not, that's one type of thing. But, that doesn't really represent the whole range of things we can do with a phone, with our watch, with, all these general programmable devices. So in what sense is that universal as a phenomenon? Well, what we argue for in this book is that a large range of technological phenomena that do not look like search, actually, are a type of search if search is understood in its essential general meaning. Okay, what is search ultimately? Is it important for search to be the linking of a query, like a piece of text, with documents, which are other pieces of text? No, it's not. They don't have to be text. They can be images and media and so on. So what ultimately is happening? What's the essential meaning here of what search is? We argue that the essential meaning of search, so what is search? What is a search phenomenon? It is a meaning generating or a meaning suggestion phenomenon. It's something that is actually a reference. It links between two things. So it's a technology, a phenomenon that links between something meaningful and something else that is meaningful. That's it. But in doing so, it actually can generate meaning because it gives the user something that they might not know, right? So it gives them something new in terms of what? In terms of the meaning of something. The meaning of what? The query. Whatever they type in, whatever they bring to the tech tells them something about it, right? As such, it gives them a deeper meaning or a more moral meaning about that thing that they bring to it. So as a result, one of the things we argue in the book is IRNS should not be seen by that name, but by a more general name. right? That is as a technology, science of technology mediated experience. So this is why, given that IRNS can be looked in this paradigmatic sense, because it deals with a phenomenon that is actually quite universal, that it becomes a good example for us to use to see, the relation of philosophical principles to the technological sciences. Okay. So what we want to do now is, and we're only going to cover, I think, the first 4 sections here. We're going to go into a more detailed description of what IRNS is, and to show some of the motivations which led us to see it that way. And the idea is, at least I hope this, this is what the listeners will take away from this. What I'm about to show you doesn't only apply to IRNS, okay? You can look at any technological science, and again, looking at IRNS, and so you can see our conclusions as applying to that context as well. So we're going to start off talking about the function and purpose of IRNS, and we're going to go from there. So this is an overview of the main sort of mechanism of information retrieval studies, which is search. And from this diagram, you can actually see what IR means and what IS means. So the problem of IR, that is information retrieval or search, is fundamentally one of reference and relation. You create search software to bring to light within a search session for some user some information, whether in the form of documents or snippets of a document, that has a relation to user needs as expressed through user behavior. As a phenomenon, search can be understood as meaning generation or suggestion, in that the referent it generates in response to user behavior, which is the document, serves to interpret that behavior, to posit what it means. When we say that search is about answering queries, which are expressions of needs or desires, the suggestion of documents upon a query can be understood as an interpretation of that query. That's not usually how it's seen, but we can see it that way without reading too much into it. In particular, it is an interpretation of the query as a question, such that the documents to be returned mean or correspond to an answer. So we see here in the diagram, user thought becoming that expression and being linked to documents, which are representations of prior knowledge of the world. And at the heart of it is a reference, which programmatically is a matching. And taken in this general way as meaning generation or suggestion and interpretation, any related phenomena where user behavior meant generally as not only words expressed, but any detectable expression in words or gestures, any sort of movement even, is responded to by a device that suggests or generates information. Right? And all these are types of search. So several related phenomena that we may not usually label as search, as we claim in the book, are actually types of search in this general way. Things like recommendation, information extraction, general search engines, which is an idea that was developed a couple of decades ago now, I think, in which the documents that you receive are not actually simple documents, but intelligently processed and summarized and other, somehow modified versions of real documents. And these are common things in IR literature. But we sort of go further than this in our book. What we say is this, that this idea of responding to human behavior through technology with a human interpretable response is not something particular to IR. Instead, it simply corresponds to intelligent interaction between human and device. As such, it denotes a kind of intelligent system, which is what any sort of AI system used to be called. If you go back even further in time, they would be called cybernetic systems. So although in this session, the problems we will speak about will be in the context of IRNS, as we said, notice that we're suddenly linking to the cybernetics, to AI, and so on, because these are problems we talk about applied generally to all these other technological sciences, or more specifically to any discourse that concerns itself with human technology relationships and seeks to also make technologies, right, or to modify those relationships, or to intervene upon them. And in any such science, you have this involvement or this inclusion of technology mediation, which means reference and relation, matching between meanings and so on, and meaning suggestions and so on. Now, you might have noticed that we're talking about IR and IS together, as IR and S with an ampersand. And this is something that we found to be a useful way of characterizing the relationship. What does this ampersand mean? It just means an unspecified juxtaposition of whatever you might call IR discourse and whatever you might call IS discourse. So we argue that not only are these two fields, not only do they share a common historical origin, but they are somehow looking at the same phenomenon from two angles. Well, IS focuses more on the side of the user behavior, right, and information behavior and so on, in the sense that it seeks to explain that behavior. IR focuses more on trying to build systems and explain system behavior. So in any sort of research project in IR and IS, there's always a sort of mix between what you might call pure IR, the study of the technical configuration and devices, and pure IS, which is the study of the human element, or the human purposes for which that device and that software is being studied or being created. So even though IS looks behind the user and the documents suggested to them, in domains and institutions and so on, we still understand its focus in the modern time to be the study of technology-mediated reference. Okay. And one of the focuses actually in our book from which this discussion comes was, I mean, one of the motivations that led to the book actually were actually not even intellectual issues. Right? They're more about practical concerns, which we're going to go into in this next slide. Right? So practical concerns based on what appear to be an imminent stage of the human technology relationship that we see with us today. And this is what we're going to turn to now. This is a couple of screenshots from the Google Glasses video, marketing video from, I think, maybe 10 years ago now, at least. And this is a sort of example technology that we think will progressively define the modern context in terms of human technology world relations. This augmented reality technology lays icons, if you look at the four things on the left. It's about laying icons on top of the world based on user orientation, location, and other contextual factors. And this is based on a narrative where somebody gets up in the morning, they look outside, they orient their heads in a certain way, looking at the world, and the world is shown in a particular way, right, with this weather information. Then they try to go to the subway, and the app recognizes this and shows them something about the subway, in particular that it is closed or suspended. And then they go into a bookshop, and they're shown an internal map of it. And then they go and see their friend, and they're shown or reminded of previous discussions or issues that were discussed with that friend, right? So the idea is to mediate very, in a kind of ubiquitous form, all the intimate stages of someone's day-to-day life, right? Okay. So these screenshots give a glimpse of how AR could change human-machine relations from being distant relative to this to much more closer and ubiquitous, meaning this mediation takes up more and more of our day. It takes over more and more of our experience of the world. Okay. Now, it doesn't matter for our purposes whether the Google Glasses are, as a tech, are yet available and popular, which they're not yet, but it seems to be the case that they will be. The point is that, and this is one of the arguments we make in the book, that this will be common and pretty normative in a short amount of time. So we can use this as a kind of example situation, practical situation, from which to see, what kind of information retrieval and science would deal with this kind of, real life situation. Okay. Now, you might be wondering, why is information retrieval and science relevant to the Google glasses? Well, these AR-based, augmented reality-based use cases that you see here are actually searches. The user prompts the system through words that are spoken or typed, or gestures which must have words behind it in some sense, in that it must, if it wants to respond to the user, create a semantic reference between the unworded gesture and a meaningful response. Of course, to a system, this is not meaningful. It is simply programmatic. However, it is programmed as such precisely on the presupposition that this linking of input to output has some meaning, that implicitly it is meaning generating. So the design of this AR system, of course, is borrowed from HCI, but as a human activity that employs technology, it is not merely interactions, not merely about HCI, but a species of information seeking, and hence involving search. But it is not only a search if we consider a search to be a basic reference between input and output, but qualitatively more. It is qualitatively more than query document relations, while nevertheless including those relations as a constituent. As such, Google Glass type applications are relevant for us to consider as having to do with IRNS. But instead of, this typical query document relation embedded in such tech use, which are semantic components, programmatically related by the system, there's a way to look at encompassing technology use, this sort of technology use phenomenon, as a type of general search. If you take the query to be an expression of information need, whatever form that expression takes, and the document as the response to that. And this is where it gets interesting. If you look at the screenshots, the gazing towards something in the world is a query, which is what expresses the user's need. Now in picture 1, what is the document? Is it the weather icons? Well, what's important to notice here is that the icons are given as icons on a particular world background, the sky, the buildings. We argue in the book that the document as response should be understood as this totality. So not just the 58 and the 10% and the icons, but the sky in its particular configuration and the buildings in their particular configuration at that time. So that's a very different idea of a document, okay? So the document here is not, text and graphics, but much more. It's the entire situation, world situation, that is associated with the tech and the user at that time. Now let's take picture 3. Here the user is guided using Google Maps over several steps to a location. What's the document? What's the query? The query has to do something with the person's location. Now, what is the document? If it's a response to the query, do we say that it is the entire journey? Or do we say it is the immediate step that you have to take, going left or going right? Okay. We'd say, it's not just, in 1 step or 2 steps, it's that entire journey. So the document here is a journey, right? Including the beginning and the end of all the parts. Within this journey, however, at each stage, to the extent that the map supervenes on the world, as a document, this journey as a document expresses the relation between the state of the device and the world. That is, not the map of the journey, but the whole journey experience with the map supervening on it. Right? So if you take these things together, as we argue in our book, the idea of a document changes radically. Here, the document is best characterized as an experience, a technology-mediated experience that is not only mental stuff, but something that combines the world, meaning the environment in the back, that is embedded. So an experience that is embedded in that environment, and embodied, meaning it's in the body of a person, quote unquote in. That has another discussion as to what that means. So to summarize, every human orientation, gaze, or state in general is a query, and every response structure which necessarily leads to an experience is a document. But what's going on here? That doesn't sound anything like a typical queries and documents in IRNS. So what do we do about this? Right? What are we doing here? Right? What does this mean? Well, what this means is that IRNS cannot only be seen in the way that is typically seen. If indeed it is, as we argue, relevant for understanding the Google Glasses and similar experiences. Instead, it has to expand from looking at, in this diagram, as you see, this combination of the user aspects and data creator aspects, documents and so on. It has to expand beyond that to context and context. The context of the world behind the weather information, and the context of the world behind the user that is giving the query or interacting with the system in some way. But that seems to be a different kind of science. What's the object of that science? What does it deal with? What kind of questions are these anyway? And what you basically find is that these are not empirical research questions. They're not about what certain documents, look like, which words are in them, or how many documents are in a collection, or how they relate to certain queries. These are not empirical questions of that nature. They're not simple theoretical questions when theory is meant in the usual way, such as mathematical theories or social theories. Okay, and here's an example of this, like mathematical representation issues based on mathematical theories. It's not one of those things. It's not about information behavior theories. We're looking to redefine the very basic terms, right? Very basic concepts. So we're looking at the bottom layer of this table, definition of query and definition of sense maker, meaning the user or forager, whatever, right? What are they and why are they the right definitions, right understandings? So when we ask these sort of questions, which come directly out of understanding the Google Glasses, so this is not some academic imagined thing, these are real things, right? Straight out of that, we have these foundational questions. What is a document? What is a query? What is a user in a system? What is a researcher even, right, in the modern context? What does it mean to evaluate? By what values? What should the relation be between man and machine? What kind of science is IRNS if it is to be widened, right? So that you look at the context of the building and the sky and not just this little bit of data on your augmented reality app. What is information? All these typical questions that we know from before, all of these become important for us, right, to solve, to resolve. And these are all philosophical questions. This image here you see is actually from the movie Her, and that movie itself is a exploration of this question in blue: what should the relation between man and machine be? Where this person has a relationship with basically code that pretends to be a partner, right? His partner, right? Which comes with many different complex questions, ethical questions, and so on, all of which are ultimately foundational or philosophical questions. So I wanted to just, leave things there, and I hope you get something from that. And I hope what you take away from that, at least, is that technological sciences, when they deal with sciences that deal with the human-technology relationship in particular, such as IRNS, in the world that we live in, where technology is ubiquitous, these technological sciences are having to deal with very deep questions. The deep questions are imposed upon them and imposed upon the researchers. And what we have to realize as such researchers is that these are not empirical questions. These are not even basic theoretical questions, but foundational questions. And we have to address them at that level. If we don't address them at that level, we will not solve the problems that we're faced with. And as a result, our sciences, both the idioscopic aspect and the cinescopic aspect that I'm trying to bring out, will not make any progress. Right? Now, that might sound controversial, especially given there's so much production of papers and so on by these scientists. So what do you mean you're not making progress? Now, that is another discussion which I'll not go into here, and it has to do with philosophy of science as to what progress means. For the argument about that, you have to go to the book. So I hope you might be encouraged or motivated to go and read it. But the idea is that there are different levels of progress, and to make significant progress, you have to solve the main problems such that your science is explanatory. It can explain why things happen. At the empirical level, we can't really explain why things happen. Why does the human being relate to this piece of code in this way, right? The character in this movie, Her, why does he relate to a piece of software in a way that is very deeply ethical and personal, right? So these are the questions we're faced with. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about this topic, and I hope you get something from it. Thank you. Bye.
Thank our esteemed invited speakers for their speeches and contributions to our conference. We have completed our opening session after the invited speaker speeches. After that, paper presentations will be made in accordance with the program published on our conference website. We wish everyone a good conference.
Değerli davetli konuşmacılarımıza sunumlarından ve konferansımıza katkılarından dolayı teşekkür ederiz. Davetli konuşmacılarımız ile birlikte açılış oturumumuzu tamamlamış bulunuyoruz. Bundan sonra konferans sitemizde yayınlanan programa uygun olarak bildiri sunumları gerçekleştirilecektir. Herkese iyi bir konferans geçirmelerini dileriz.